Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archeo Viking, and happy early Thanksgiving. In honor of the holiday, I've decided to make a two-part series explaining the real historical origins of Thanksgiving. Today's video will cover the real reason the Pilgrims actually fled to the Americas. So, what our traditional holiday or idea of Thanksgiving is usually seen as is this picture. Um, Puritans escaping from Europe from England specifically to get away from religious oppression and coming to America for freedom, and then being helped by friendly Native Americans or American Indians, as they can also be referred to. And then that's just sort of the end of it. However, that is incredibly whitewashed history. For one thing, they were not actually Puritans. They called themselves Separatists. Puritans wanted to stay within the English church and change it there, whereas Separatists, like the Pilgrims here, wanted to just simply leave the church. In fact, the Puritans founded a different colony than Plymouth in what is now modern day Massachusetts. They founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, whereas the Plymouth Separatists founded the Plymouth Colony. And again, they didn't even flee to America for religious freedom. In fact, they fled to the Netherlands, or the Dutch Republic, as it was called at the time, right around here, instead. And they fled. When they fled there, they actually had quite a lot of religious freedom. And they stayed there for about 10 years. But, the question is, well, if they had this religious freedom, and they had already gotten it after fleeing England, why did they leave the Netherlands for the Americas? Well, it was for a few reasons. One of those reasons was ethnocentrism and nationalism. They were not happy that their British children were marrying into the Dutch population as a whole. They felt they were going to go extinct and no longer be English if they stayed there. So that is definitely an issue. Another issue is a couple of very large events that they didn't know were going to be very large at the time, but they were still troubling events nonetheless. One was the end of what was called the 12-year truce. The 12-year truce was an event that happened as part of the so-called 80 Years' War, or the Dutch Revolt. Essentially, what the 80 Years' War was is the Dutch Republic wanted to be free of Spanish rule, as Spain, for a good chunk of the 16th and 17th century, controlled all of the Netherlands. And so they began a rebellion that lasted over 80 years, roughly. Again, there was a 12-year truce, and this was the result of that 12-year truce. You had the Dutch Republic over here, and the other half of the Netherlands was the Spanish Netherlands. So most definitely, the Netherlands were split in half, obviously. So this 12-year truce was beginning to end, and they were worried. The Pilgrims were worried that the Spanish Empire was going to basically come and wipe them out. And this was also very important because part of the reason that this 12-year truce was beginning to dissolve was another shorter yet much larger event had begun, the so-called 30 Years' War, of which the last half of the Dutch 80 Years' War was technically part of. So the 30 Years' War was this huge, as the name suggests, 30-year-long grudge match between mainly the Holy Roman Empire in Spain and other countries such as Denmark, Sweden, and France. And it started in 1618 and didn't end until 1648. So it was this very reason, this very war, that the British Separatists, or Pilgrims as we know them, fled to America. Is that these two events were right at the beginning, and they were worried about being wiped out. Okay, so for the rest of this video, it's going to seem like the story of the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving are going to take a bit of a back seat, and they most definitely are. And the reason for that is it needs to be explained why these events were such a cause for the Pilgrims to flee. Why did they feel that they had to flee? I mean, after all, they had faced wars in the United Kingdom, England, and Wales and such already. And it was clear that it didn't matter where they were going to go, there was still going to be war. So why did they feel like they had to leave? One of the reasons was the 80 Years of War had been raging on and had been witness to a spectacular amount of very bloody sieges, some sieges lasting even 10 years or 20 years at a time, off and on again, but still. So it's this reason. So what I do, we're going to get into the main subject matter. Excuse me. So the Dutch Revolt mainly started in the 1500s between these. This is the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War began in 1618 with the Bohemian Revolt, which was started mainly because of political and religious tensions. Specifically, the Bohemians were a majority Protestant population, while the Holy Roman Empire, what we know as modern-day Germany, was predominantly Catholic. And then the political tensions were that the figure on the left, Frederick V, was offered the throne of the Holy Roman Empire in Bohemia, only to have it sort of ripped from him by the figure on the right, Ferdinand II. So because of this, and because of the growing Protestant Catholic religious tensions that had been growing for quite a while, before then, you'd seen the so-called First Demonstration of Prague, one Protestant revolt, the Hussite War, and various other Protestant uprisings. So a lot of tension was building already, and this was just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And so as a result of that, a war began that lasted 30 years that was originally a holy war, for lack of a better term, a religious war, but it didn't really last that long. Eventually, it became, for lack of a better term, a dick measuring contest between the royalty in Europe, specifically four main countries. Sweden under Gustav Adolf, more commonly known as Gustavo Adolphus. I'll refer to him in this video as Gustaf Olaf, and the Swedish monarchy, along with Louis the 13th and the French monarchy on one side, and then Philip II and Ferdinand II on the other side. Almost immediately, within the first 10 years, dissolved into this contest between rulers. So the war began in 1618, thanks to the Bohemian Revolt, due to the crackdown of Protestantism from the Catholic Jesuit educated Ferdinand II, along with the fact that Frederick V was no longer allowed to have the throne of Bohemia or the Holy Roman Empire. And so with that, the Protestant forces began ravaging the countryside before eventually being defeated by the Holy Roman Empire's army at the Battle of White Mountain. But even though this army was defeated in this disastrous battle, Frederick V was actually able to escape to the Dutch Republic to continue the war effort of the 30 Years' War, and also help reignite the 80 Years' War against Habsburg Spain in 1621, only to see a variety of losses again from Spain, from Spain, where Spain took quite a lot of cities from the Dutch Republic, especially Breda, which was one of those cities that had been under off and on sieges for about 21 years before this final siege under a large Dutch army was able to take it, and actually resulted in the death of Maurits of Orange, or Maurits of Nassau, one of the main Dutch leaders, and also who was also an innovator and known for creating the so-called modern warfare techniques. It's not really the case. I mean, it is and it isn't. That's a subject for another video. In fact, a couple of videos that I will include in the iCard that talk about the subject in more depth. But needless to say, very disastrous battles happened at the start of the reignition of the 80 Years' War and the start of the 30 Years' War. And then this also led into other kings coming to sort of the aid of the Protestant forces, but really to further their own interests, such as Christian IV, the King of Denmark, who marched into the Holy Roman Empire on the Protestant side, but it didn't really end very well. He lost quite a lot of battles and eventually had to withdraw and sign a peace treaty with the Holy Roman Empire. However, in the Dutch Republic, other events happened actually quite on the opposite end. The Dutch Republic began a sort of a massive counterattack measure where they began winning quite a lot of battles, such as defeating the Spanish fleet at the Battle of the Bay of Matanzas. So it was a bit of a mixed bag. And this picture right here is a artist rendition of the surrender at the city of Breda in 1624. And then in as I said, in 1628 and 1629, the Dutch Republic began their counterattack, taking several fortresses such as Wesel, and of course, beating the fleet in the aforementioned Battle of the Bay of Matanzas. Sorry for butchering that. I know I butchered that earlier. And then also, with a combined Dutch, English, and Scottish army, they were able to defeat the Spain at the siege of Hertongenbosch. Again, sorry if I butchered that. I'm probably going to butcher a few names in this video. Apologies. However, for the Protestant forces, they did actually begin to see a change in luck right about the same time that the Dutch Republic did. And this was because the aforementioned King of Sweden, Gustaf Adolf, intervened in the 30 Years' War. And what makes this important is Gustaf Adolf was one of these many figures in the 30 Years' War who had been tested in a series of very long wars. He had won many battles against one of the preeminent powers at the time, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, who was known for its very effective cavalry measures. He'd also fought Russia and even Denmark to very great effects as well. And he was, again, sort of like Maurits of Orange, one of these figures who was the so-called father of modern warfare. In fact, much like Maurus, he wasn't the only one who was the father of modern warfare, but he was, again, like Maurus, very influential. And one of the ways he did it was he sort of copied the Polish idea of light and heavy cavalry while copying the Spanish and Dutch idea of rows of musketmen and cannons to supplement them. So it was a very mixed military system, sort of akin to the Mongol Empire. So he was very skilled in warfare, and so when he entered the 30 Years' War on the side of the Protestant faction, he began seeing massive amounts of victories. He captured Pomerania, he captured Prussia, he captured German cities such as Frankfurt and Magdeburg. These are by no means the only cities he captured. He captured quite a lot. He ravaged the countryside, defeated several Holy Roman armies, imperial armies in skirmishes. Especially, and then also major battles. In 1631, though in 1632, the two of the major battles that he won were the Battle of Breitenfeld and the Battle of Reims, where he defeated very large imperial armies under the Holy Roman, under the imperial general Tilly. And he continued to ravage after those battles the countryside for much of 1632 before losing the Battle of Alta Veste in September 3rd and 4th of 1632. Right here is a picture of the battle makeup of the Battle of Breitenfeld, where Gustav Adolf began to turn the tide. And the Swedish army still, despite the loss at Alta Vista, still continued to see quite a lot of victories, specifically the Battle of Lutzen in November 16th of 1632. Unfortunately, this also saw the death of Gustav Adolf, who died after suffering a severe gun wound. So the Swedish army was left without its main leader. In fact, he died halfway through the battle. But rather than beginning to fall back at the death of their leader, the Swedish army seems, according to all accounts, seems to have become furious at that anyone would dare to kill their ruler. He was much loved by his army, in case you couldn't tell by my description, mainly because he basically did everything the army did. He slept on the ground with them. He ate bad water with them. He got sick when they got sick. He suffered when they suffered. So they had great love for this king, especially as a general, and they even saw him not as an equal, but they saw that he was willing to undergo the same things that he went. Around the same time that the Battle of Lutzen was happening, actually a few months before, the Dutch army was also able to capture the city of Maastricht, and so winning great victories for themselves. And then the Swedish army saw a mixed bag. They were able to capture Regensburg in 1633, but unfortunately they lost the Battle of Nordlingen in 1634 and were forced to temporarily withdraw from the Holy Roman Empire. And this is right here the battle makeup of the Battle of Lutzen. As you can see, they were roughly equal in size. However, with the temporary withdrawal of Sweden, this was not the end of the war by even a long shot. This is where again, it really began to become this slog match and grudge match between these rulers of Europe, especially with the entrance of France on the side of the Protestants, which is in 1635, which is interesting because France was and still is a majority Catholic nation. So you would think, oh, well, they would side with the majority Catholic Spain and and Holy Roman Empire. Not so much. And the reason is Spain and the Holy Roman Empire were both ruled by the very powerful Habsburg dynasty that had been on the rise for, I believe, a couple hundred years, and had actually been, one of their prominences. And what the reason the Habsburgs rose was actually they had been the main ones who had fought the Ottoman Empire as it was coming in through Eastern Europe. And they had won a lot of battles, and also lost a lot of battles, and actually lost the so-called Long Turkish War in 1590, where, again, this war is where a lot of generals got a lot of experience, including one of the main imperial generals, Wallenstein. So with the Habsburgs growing in power, France was like, no, we may be Catholic, but we don't like you guys. We're going to enter on the side of the guys who hate you like we do, enemy of my enemy kind of scenario. But unfortunately, much like the Danish intervention, their first few times sort of didn't work out very well for them. They sent an army of about 20,000, of about 30,000, about 30,000 into the Spanish Netherlands. And they were able to get a good degree of success in the Spanish Netherlands. Unfortunately, disease and desertion took out most of their army, leaving only about 13,000 to walk back to France. However, the opposite began to happen for Sweden, as the Swedish army under Johan Brenner was able to take back Pomerania in northeast Germany at the Battle of Woodstock. And then also the Dutch Republic in October 11th of 1637 began to see even more success, successfully retaking the city of Breda in the fifth siege of Breda, and also destroying a Spanish fleet at the Battle of Downs, and also raiding holdings in America and Africa, Spanish holdings in America and Africa, and sort of indirectly and directly at the same time causing a second revolt in the Spanish Empire in Portugal, because at the time Portugal was not a separate nation. It had been before and then was conquered by the Habsburgs. So at this point in time, it was no longer a separate nation. So we began to rebel to become its other nation again. And this is right here shows why France was so worried about the Habsburg dynasty. You see, they have had quite a lot of imperial controls over here. By the way, the lined parts are pre 1700s, so right in the 30 Years' War era is where you get they have controls of Spain, Portugal, southern Italy, parts of northern Italy, Switzerland, all the way as far east as Transylvania, and of course the Holy Roman Empire. So very large imperial family. So they had very good reason to worry about the Habsburgs gaining power, especially considering that this is not even all their holdings. As I mentioned, they had holdings in Africa and America too. I mean, France and Britain did as well, but that aside, Spain at the time was by far the largest. Spain and the Holy Roman Empire under the Habsburgs were by far the largest, to be more specific. So with the reentrance of Sweden into the 30 Years' War and the entrance of France into it as well, what could have only lasted for a couple of decades just continued to be the slog match, with uh, Swedish armies, Swedish and French forces winning the battles of Wolfenbüttel, and the Battle of Kempen. Swedish armies winning the battles of Breitenfeld and Yonkau. The French army winning Rocroi, winning Rocroi and Nordlingen. The second battle of Nordlingen, etc., etc. All these ranging from the first battle, the Swedish and French forces at Wolfenbüttel in June 1641, with the last battle, the Battle of Nordlingen, being in August 3rd of 1645. So quite a lot of victories on the Protestant side. However, it should also be noted the Imperial forces did also win quite a lot of victories. In fact, right after taking much of central and eastern Germany, the Swedish army was unable to take Freiburg and lost the Battle of Freiburg. But then we're also able to win the Battle of Yonkau. Unfortunately, the army at the time of the Battle of Yonkau, the Swedish army at least, was incredibly exhausted and couldn't continue into the rest of Germany. And that, and also the general, very skilled general of the Swedish army, named Torstensson. His first name is escaping me, but Torstensson was this skilled Swedish general who is every bit as skilled as his predecessor and friend, and who was also his teacher, Gustaf Olaf. In fact, he's the one who won the Second Battle of Breitenfeld, destroying over 10,000 Imperial forces, and winning the Battle of Yonkau and taking much of eastern and northern Germany. Unfortunately, after the Battle of Yonkau, he began to become sick with a variety of issues, including gout, and was forced to withdraw from the war effort and be replaced by another Swedish general. So, thanks to this and the push and pull of the Imperial and Protestant forces, the war just turned into an all-out. I know I've used this a few times, but it's really, I cannot say this enough, really drew out into an all-out grudge match between the factions that continued really without anyone gaining any ground from 1645 to 1648. And this is right here, the Battle of Rocroi, or at least an artist representation of it. However, the 30 Years' War did eventually come to an end, and it came to an end for a variety of reasons. First, the Dutch Republic and the Spanish Empire signed the Treaty of Munster, therefore ending the 80 Years' War in January 30th of 1648. Meanwhile, a combined Swedish and French army won the Battle of Zusmarhausen in May 17th of 1648, and a Swedish army attacked and sacked half of Prague. They were unable to they took the western half, weren't able to take the eastern half of Prague. It really just sort of turned out to be a draw. And right as the Swedish commander was about to start his final assault on Prague, he got word in October 24th that the Peace of Westphalia was signed, ending the 30 Years' War. And the result of this peace was, in essence, the Swiss and Dutch republics were granted independence from the Habsburg dynasty, specifically the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, while Sweden and France were able to keep quite a few of their holdings. Sweden was able to keep much of Germany, including Pomerania and Prussia, and France was able to gain new lands, including Metz and Lorraine, which are now still part of France, while Pomerania and Prussia are not part of Sweden anymore. So Germany and the Habsburgs lost quite a lot, but they weren't the only ones who lost. And by the way, here's the final sort of boundaries of the 30 Years' War, with Estonia, Livonia, or by the way, are part of Sweden at the time, but with Pomerania, Brandenburg, and Prussia, as well as a few other minor states being part of Sweden, while Lorraine and Metz and such over here are now part of France. By the way, I couldn't mention them all in this video, but I did a little bit, but not enough. The Dutch Republic and Portugal were not the only ones who were rebelling against Spain at the time. You also had Milan and various other Italian city-states who were rebelling against the Habsburgs at the same time. And I will include videos about those events in the iCard. But so what was the real cost of this 30 Years' War? Well, it was a very bloody war. I mean, in case you couldn't figure that out from a 30-year war. So what historians can guess, and this is still only an estimate, but it's the best estimate they can have, is the total civilian death casualty rate of the 30 Years' War was between 3,500,000 to 6,500,000, with a total dead, not just including civilian, but soldiers as well, being estimated to be about 4,500,000 to 8 million. That's a massive casualty rate. In fact, it is the casualty rate of World War I. So, I mean, of course, World War I was a lot shorter than the 30 Years' War by quite a lot, but that's still an amazing casualty rate, and it's still something to remember that this war was by no means a world war. I mean, it could be counted as that, considering the Dutch Republic was raiding Africa and America, but it wasn't really. Most of the battles were in Europe, in the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire. So for a war that was contained in such a small area versus World War I, which is in Europe and Asia and parts of Africa, that's a massive casualty rate for such a small area. So why was this? Why were so many people slaughtered and killed during this war? And those terms are actually not completely useful, but that I just said. But why did it happen? Well, it happened for a variety of causes. One, warfare, of course. You have these actually five major powers: the Dutch Republic, France, the Holy Roman Empire, Sweden, and Spain, fighting each other in this small area of land. And that's a little bit of an understatement, because the Holy Roman Empire was not small. It was actually one of the larger countries in Europe. But it's still, you got 4 different imperial armies fighting in this land. So of course you're going to have a high casualty rate from that, not just soldiers, villages, citizens of cities, etc. But it wasn't the only cause. You had other causes, such as disease. I mean, you have armies from 4 different other nations marching into the Holy Roman Empire, so bringing diseases from all over Europe, from France, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, and the Dutch Netherlands. Something I was unable to mention, the Malrus of Orange did send 4,000 soldiers to help the Bohemian Revolt. So quite a lot of intermingling of bodies from different regions, so the disease could spread very easily. And then also starvation. Each of these armies ravaged the countryside for 30 years, obviously 30 years, not back to back, but still, I mean, the second you have a farm fixed up, another army comes in and burns it so that their enemies can't eat from it, therefore preventing you, the farmer, from eating from it. So of course you're going to starve. You're not, if you can't fix up your food, how can you eat? And that's basically what happened to most of the whole Roman Empire. That and also banditry was happening a lot, and so uh, it was just a bad mix of a lot of situations that led to this casualty rate: the warfare, the disease, the starvation, the chaos caused by the war and raiding and banditry and such. Um, so unfortunately, those are the reasons why this casualty rate was high. And it is with this reason that the pilgrims that I'm finally returning to had to leave. The 80 Years' War had already done similar things, but now you had this other unknown war beginning alongside the 80 Years' War. And of course, they had no way of knowing that the 30 Years and 80 Years' War would continue to be these grudge matches or dick measuring contests between these European kings and emperors. But I mean, they had already experienced war in England for quite a lot of years. There have been a host of civil wars in England, so it's not hard to believe that they knew they better get the hell out of there before they did see something like this. So while they may not have known for sure that this war would be like this, they knew it was going to be bloody regardless. And that ends our presentation. My presentation. I thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, and share. I will have part 2 up the day before Thanksgiving, so keep an eye out for that. And I hope you have a good day.